An old conversation is bubbling up to the surface in the One Piece waters. Ooh, this conversation is something that is very, very cordial, very tame, very lukewarm though, okay? Make no mistake, when we debate this, it's always a good time. People are open-minded, absolutely they are. And this convo is the Zoro and Sanji conversation. Oh my God, yay! GMO-free, organic, Zoro and Sanji. As of late, people on X, a very, very, very safe space, were debating about what was said in the latest One Piece mini magazine. The mini magazines are small additions to, let's say, the Weekly Shonen Jump issues, and Oda himself does take part in these magazines in terms of comments, in terms of sketchwork, and so on and so forth. So, for example, we did see some sketchwork of his first thoughts about Garling, how it should be designed. The same for Shamrock and his design. Also, the first iterations of what could have been Gear 5 Luffy that were actually based on Snake Man, looking more sinister, a little more prickly, all right, a little more savage. Oh! So there are things like that we see in this mini magazine. And of course, character breakdown and crew breakdowns. And when you get to the Straw Hat Pirates, there's an interesting section or comment said about a certain blonde hair, curly eyebrow chef. And I quote, a first-rate chef who takes care of the crew's stomach, and at the same time, he's also a combatant who fights with magnificent footwork. Though his bounty is lower than Zoro's, their abilities are evenly matched, worthy of being called wings. Now, this, of course, got people stirred up. Even though Robin herself did say that Sanji is a man worthy of being one of the wings of the Kings of Pirate. Fact of the matter is that in this mini magazine, you do have the statement that they are evenly matched, which is more confirmation that in terms of strength, or in a power scaling terminology, in terms of combat ability, Zoro and Sanji are even. They are neck and neck. They are even. They are even. Not, let's say, in the same vein as Goku and Vegeta. Goku over here, Vegeta always over here. No. In reality, it's more like Asta and Yuno, where they're evenly matched. They are true rivals through and through. This just solidifies that idea even further. And of course, folks, in a very cordial, in a very tame way, where debate is online on that post. You have many folks talking about how this is a bad translation, but then you have Salmon of Arlong Park, who is known online on X for having very accurate translations. And he says this on the matter: although Sanji's bounty is lower than Zoro's, the two are evenly matched in terms of strength, making Sanji truly worthy of being called one of the two wings. So this intel is hella juicy, particularly for someone like me who has believed for a very long time, ever since 14 years ago when I first started my channel. I was 10 toes down on the idea that Zoro and Sanji were equal in terms of strength. They would fluctuate at times, but overall they'd be equal in terms of combat ability. That's the idea that Oda had set up for a very long time. Other folks believe that no, not the case, where Zoro is superior always than Sanji in terms of combat ability. Other folks believe the reverse, that Sanji is stronger than Zoro. And this is the debate that's going to be happening, whether it be in the present day, whether it be in the past, or in the future. It's going to be a debate we're going to be seeing time and time again, even probably until the series is long over. That's very possible. But the idea is simple though. In this magazine, you have confirmation that they are evenly matched. Though to be fair, even though Oda himself does take part in the magazine, the mini magazine, not everything is bar for bar confirmed by Oda. Oda does have statements. Oda does have sketches. So some of the content there is canon content. However, not everything is reviewed with a fine-tooth comb by Oda for, say, character statements and designs and so on and so forth. That's the idea, at least. But if Oda wanted to tell the Shueisha editorial team that something was off, something needed to be changed, they would change it. That's obvious, because again, he takes part in the magazine in some ways. So the idea is that even though it's not necessarily all canon, it's also pretty close to canon, and it is consistent with the canon material that we've seen for a very long time now. So on that note, putting to pen and paper Oda's mindset he's had even before One Piece started. So when I said what I said about pre-One Piece, what did I mean? One Piece first dropped in 1997. So it's been almost 30 years since One Piece dropped. But before One Piece dropped, in 1994, Oda had sketchwork of two characters in particular that personify the idea of Zoro and Sanji, the true rivalry, the Asta and Yuno rivalry. And these characters are Ryoma and Romeo. Now, Romeo as of late has gotten like a meme boom on X. But Romeo is a character that personifies the knight, and Ryuma is the character that personifies the samurai. One, the samurai using Sesha, the other, the knight using Boku. And the idea in this sort of sketchwork here is that they would always be at each other's odds no matter what. Even in peril, or even when a king commands them to kill a dragon, they would fight each other. And the king saying, please stop it already, fight, even though there's a dragon right in front of them. So the idea of the knight Romeo is clearly the idea of Sanji in One Piece today. And the idea of the samurai Ryuma is of course the idea of Zoro in the story today. And then in the early One Piece, let's say East Blue Saga, you see the dynamic between Sanji and Zoro, one embodying a very Bushido-esque way of doing things, where you want to throw your life at your goals and dreams. Even if you die, at least you tried and you died trying. Another one is about self-protection, where you can only achieve your dreams by being alive in the first place. The former being Zoro and the latter being Sanji. And you see that sort of bedrock be built in these Blue Saga between how Zoro views things and how Sanji views things. And moving forward, you see how that rivalry sort of builds and builds and builds very distinctly, obviously, well, let's say the hunting game in Little Garden. Where Little Garden, both Zoro and Sanji hunt a dinosaur. You have Sanji hunting T-Rex, and then you have Zoro hunting a Triceratops, and then determining which one is bigger. The rivalry between Zoro and Sanji is very early on, even though you do have Whiskey Peak, Luffy versus Zoro, fist versus swords fight. And in that fight, they're trying to determine who's stronger, between Luffy's fist or Zoro's sword. So even though Whiskey Peak does exist, the fact of the matter is that the vast majority of rival interactions that we see with Zoro, the character, even though he has a few with Luffy at the beginning of the story, those cease to exist at a certain point in time. There is no more rivalry between Zoro and Luffy at, let's say, past Whiskey Peak, honestly. You don't really see it anymore past then. And then instead what you see, almost 99% of the cases here, what you see is Zoro and Sanji in terms of the rivalry. Sanji is Zoro's primary rival, and vice versa. All the way up until present, that's been the consistent theme. And you can see how, in terms of the themes of the characters, following on what Oda really established, let's say, the knight and the samurai before the series started, Sanji is the knight of the crew and Zoro is the samurai. Or another way of viewing it is that Zoro is the sword of the crew and Sanji is the shield of the crew. And now we get to themes and how this works out, why it makes a lot of sense that Sanji and Zoro are genuine, true blue rivals. And I think a really strong moment or arc that depicts the idea of Zoro being the sword and Sanji being the shield is Thriller Bark. When you go back to Thriller Bark, what happens with Zoro in that arc? They get their shadow stolen, then they get memed on, they put back on the ship, and then they have to go back into the castle to get their shadows back. Zoro runs into Brook Ryuma. It's a very good fight and a very popular fight in One Piece for sure. Like, even to this day it is. It's great. And that was an excellent sword duel where Zoro takes virtually no damage during that fight. It's about Zoro taking out the enemy at hand, displaying fantastic sword skill in the process. Sword skill that is kind of paired, let's say, Brook's sword skill, because Brook's sword skill is the speed type, but Zoro's more of a power type. And then you see how the attacks themselves can fly in the air. And that distinction of power is a very important detail between the gap that Zoro has as a swordsman versus what Brook has as a swordsman. Because Brook can't do that as a swordsman, but Brook Ryoma could because he had more muscle mass. Whereas, let's say, someone like Zoro could match that muscle mass that Brook Ryoma had. And then you see how Brook Ryoma does hearken to the old days. He can actually sense a sort of monster kind of lurking inside of Zoro. And then after after that duel, he gives him his third sword, at that point in time his latest sword, Meito Shusui, the Black Blade. So you can see how Zoro personifies a lot of that direct and visible striking and attacking and defeating the enemy at hand. But then look at Sanji. Sanji fights a weaker opponent, Absalom, but in the process he has to do what? He has to protect Nami. Nami, who was knocked out, unconscious, being forced to a wedding, all these things. And Sanji has to go in there and at a disadvantage fight against someone while he's literally holding up Nami above his head, taking attacks from Absalom left, right, and center. Attacks that are super enhanced by Absalom's physique. Sanji takes a full course of blows from Absalom before he's able to actually get the jump on Absalom and then return the favor and then beats him. Though Absalom is still conscious for a few minutes, he does sneak Nami away and then pass it later on. But the idea is simple though. Sanji's task was to do what? It was ultimately to protect and save Nami.
Sanji, お前、ナミのこと頼むぞ。当たり前じゃ。
What was Zoro's task? Defeat the enemy in front of them. The ideal of the sword and shield that anyone can understand. It's as plain as day, clear as crystal. Zoro is the sword that cuts down all foes, even at the risk of his own life. Mihawk and Baratie almost dies with that same wound on Arlong Park. The man is still near death with that wound, and he's still willing to fight even though he's in a great deal of pain. Arlong is choking out Zoro. He opens up the wound and he says, this man shouldn't be alive. How is he still functioning? I gotta kill him now. Jumping to Wano Country, he's covered in bandages because of the roof piece fight, but Miyagi has a mink regeneration super drug that can get Zoro back on his feet. But the aftershock, after all, will be immense. Zoro doesn't care. Put my life on the table, I'll get it done. Zoro does that constantly over and over and over again in the series. But then look at Sanji. In Wano Country, one of his best moments is what? Saving Momonosuke from King and Queen. Jumping back to Mr. Prince, he's able to save and help the track crew by being Mr. Prince and talking to Crocodile. And then later on in Alabasta, seeing that play out when he sneaks at the casino and he kicks the banana gator and he saves Zoro, Usopp, and company in the cage. The same thing goes down in Enies Lobby. While Rob Lucci and Luffy are fighting each other, and you have the Straws fighting against all those Marines that come down on the main bridge, Sanji isn't there for a large part of that battle. He comes later on, and then we find out as they're escaping that the Whirlpools have reformed. And the reason why is because Sanji went on a stealth mission to close the gates of justice, thereby doing what? Protecting the family, protecting the crew, making sure that everyone's a-okay. So a lot of Sanji's roles of espionage, interception, leadership, you name it, a lot of his roles center around protecting people. Even lately on Agate Island, Sanji darts into the battlefield to save Bonnie, who's in danger. He does that several times. He even kicks Kizaru's beam away to protect Bonnie. What's Zoro doing? Fighting against Rob Lucci, a strong enemy against the Strack crew. So you can see how these roles are very systematic by Oda. He does it purposefully and he does it constantly, time and time and time again between Zoro and Sanji. Zoro, if I die for it, so be it. Sanji, staying alive is how you protect what matters. That's how you get these parallels between Zoro and Sanji, the sword and the shield. The Yonko saga, like the biggest plays that Zoro and Sanji have, they also personify this idea very well, where Zoro's biggest play for his arc, the Wano Country arc, in the Yonko saga was arguably him getting that scar on Kaido. It's an offensive attack where he gets the acknowledgement from Kaido. Well, that was a very powerful move. So he's able to scar Kaido, adding on to Oden's scar. You can say for sure that was his crowning achievement in Wano Country, his arc, scarring an Emperor of the Sea like Kaido. On the flip side, what does Sanji do? Sanji, leading these chefs in Whole Cake Island, he's able to bake the wedding cake of Big Mom's dreams, and her hunger pangs stop. In the process, by doing that, he's able to save tens of millions of lives across the entirety of Totland because no one could stop her hunger pangs in that part of the world, meaning that she would have killed millions of people before her energy and her hunger pangs went away. So Sanji saves an entire section of the New World, whereas Zoro gets a scar on Emperor of the Sea. Shield, Sanji, save millions of lives. Sword, Zoro, scar, the strongest creature in the world, Kaido. The shield and sword. The dynamic is there, and it's consistent. And if Oda is consistent with that, when you go into the logistics of their strength, he's also pretty consistent with that too. So what I'm gonna say now are similar things I said before in my RTTV interview I had with Wells and Rob and company. So check that out because it was a good combo for, let's say, 2.5 hours. You have the time for it. In the interview, I run through some of the logistics of it. Every time you see a sort of group battle where there is an opposition that has a pecking order of the leader, second strongest, third strongest, fourth strongest, and so on and so forth, it tends to be the case the strongest guy, Luffy, beats them, but has a hell of a time doing so. Whether it be Kaido, whether it be Crocodile, whether it be Rob Lucci, he has a hell of a time doing it. Zoro beats the second strongest, and Sanji beats the third strongest. But Sanji always has, from the beginning of the story up until now, Sanji always has an easier time beating the third strongest dude than Zoro has beating the second strongest dude. In power scaling layman's terms, with Luffy's fight against the main bad guy, they tend to be extreme diff. For Zoro, they tend to be extreme diff. But for Sanji, they tend to be high diff. However, it's not consistent because, ironically enough, in the very beginning of the series, it was flipped. The second in command of the All-Along Pirates wasn't Hachi. It was Kurobi, or at least he has the second highest bounty in the All-Along Pirates. So Kurobi is the number 2. Hachi is the number 3. And Sanji at All-Along Park, his introductory fight to the Strat crew, the first time Oda does the 1, 2, 3 sort of system, Sanji beats the number 2 and Zoro beats the number 3. Now, it's not to say that Zoro couldn't beat Kurobi. Of course not. He could have, duh, obviously. But Sanji can still beat the number 2. And when you realize that, I think it becomes very, very clear that this is the case for Sanji for the entire series of One Piece. Sanji can beat the number 2 of an opposing hostile crew or force because he's already demonstrated at the very beginning of the story that he can do that. According to Oda himself, Luffy, Zoro, and Nami are the 3 Straw Hats that move the series the most. And because Zoro is a character archetype that Oda also understands is necessary for the series to be as popular as it is, Zoro is always going to tend to get the number 2 strongest person in any sort of faction. And since the direction of the character nowadays is way more serious and fight focused, less so on a lot less so on the comedy side nowadays, the fact of the matter is that Zoro, when he fights, these are really times to show off a great spectacle, and they're going to, at least normally, they get a lot of focus. Egghead Island was a bit weird on Oda's part to really leave Zoro for a while, but when he got the job done, it was still a very good show nonetheless. That being said though, Zoro is always going to really get those heavy focus fight moments because a lot of his character, in terms of what is appealing to his character, is focused on that, which is also part of the reason why his fight should be tougher. A tougher opponent means more chance for Zoro to show off more of his skills and his abilities without too many outside factors or shenanigans to bog that down. And coming out of it all, he's exhausted, he's tired, maybe even on the verge of death, but it's a job well done and an amazing fight. Sanji, I think, particularly in Japan, for obvious reasons, he is deemed to be a funnier character than someone like Zoro because he has a lot more comedic moments in the story that Oda does appreciate. But he's still not a prime mover like Zoro is. But when it comes to the rivalry of the fights and their power, the play-by-play clearly shows what I've been saying for years now. Zoro has a harder time. Zoro fights Kaku off the rip with some Usopp shenanigans here and there, but Sanji gets beat down by Khalifa for a period of time because he cannot hit a woman, and then has to fight against Jabra. And then during that fight, Zoro's having a harder time doing Kaku for sure, whereas Sanji's giving Jabra the full kick course. Even memes on Jabra when Jabra lies about him and Robin being brother and sister, right? So Sanji gives Jabra the work. Going back to Alabasta, Mr. 1 versus Zoro. At the end of that fight, Zoro is able to effectively one-shot Mr. 1, but he is totaled. Zoro is done, bleeding immensely on the ground, and he can barely even move. Whereas Sanji walks around with a few broken ribs after fighting against Mr. 2, Bone Clay. Then let's say we jump all the way over to Wano Country, why not, right? Zoro gets a mink regeneration health boost drug that keeps him up on his feet of the entirety of that fight. But Sanji has actually the reverse, where Sanji, in the first part of their fight with Queen, and then mind you, fights against King and Queen off screen, Sanji's taking more and more and more damage. And that's after the fact that he gets beaten up by Black Maria. All of the damage that Zoro took from Kaido and Big Mom and the Conquest of the Sea combo move that they did, all that damage is getting regenerated, whereas Sanji doesn't have that luxury. But then after Zoro comes in chapter 1022, right, when the stars take the stage, what do we find in the next chapter in 1023? We find out that apparently Sanji's body, after the raid suit usage, has been feeling off. Like he has been himself the entire time he was fighting Queen and King. So the entire time Sanji was feeling off. Something was wrong with his body. He was going through his mutation. That was throwing him off. And that was all before Zoro came back with the mink regeneration drug. And then later on in that fight, what do we see? Later on, coming in that fight, we see against King of Wildfire and Zoro gives all his haki to Enma. And in doing so, he puts his life at risk. Nowhere does Sanji even do anything comparable to that. Sanji doesn't have to put his life on the line to be Queen the Plague in the same way Zoro does. But think about the sword and the shield, right? Zoro the sword. I need to give all of my energy to Enma, even if it costs me my life. Maintain that sort of Bushido mentality. Gets Conqueror's Haki infusion, has the final section of their duel between him and King gets defeated. Sanji the shield. In the middle of this fight, in come Chuji, the mouse, and Osome. And Osome is being attacked by Queen. Sanji realizes that Queen was the one who attacked Osome, not himself. Sanji, who was in a mental fog, now gets clarity. He locks in. He instantly goes Ifrit Jambe, combos his ass, and sends him packing Team Rocket style, maintaining the themes in a consistent, logistical way throughout the entirety of the story, even in Wano Country. So much easier for Sanji to go in Ifrit Jambe compared to Zoro to go into the King of Hell form. In fact, we now know, confirmed, that Zoro didn't even realize he was using Conqueror's Haki the entire time. But Sanji knew exactly what to do, how to do it, the moment he realized he didn't betray his code. It is so consistent, it's scary. Where whenever Sanji has to fight, more often than not, it's going to be tricky, it's going to be some outside factors, mental factors, and so on and so forth. But with Zoro, they tend to be just straight up, bar for bar, man to man, fight to fight. But the themes of the sword and the shield never leave Zoro, and they never leave Sanji. And even their opponents, in a lot of situations, even their opponents rival each other. Like, for example, Mr. 1 and Bone Clay, Mr. 2, had a fight. Das Bones fought Bone Clay in some abandoned shack in the middle of nowhere in Alabasta when Baroque Works had a meeting. During Enies Lobby, Jabra and Kaku were at odds with each other. Constantly. You see them arguing and bickering during a lot of the Usopp and Zoro shenanigans section. And then with Queen and King, they were also at odds with each other. Showing how close they were to each other in terms of combat. So this is the vast majority of how Oda operates when it comes to Zoro and Sanji. The vast majority of the information that Oda has when it comes to Zoro and Sanji is that they're virtually equal, and it'll even display out to other crews like the Roger Pirates, where you have Rayleigh and Scopper now, where Scopper is insisting that he was the second strongest. Scopper is viewed as the left-hand man, someone on par with Rayleigh. Scopper clearly being the Sanji equivalent in the Roger Pirates, and he's on par with Rayleigh. When people bring up the chapter 1031 color page spread of all of the number 2s as Oda sees them, right? Even though people don't realize that he says as he sees them, that's him playing cheeky and dodging the Sanji and Zoro bit. You have Rayleigh, who's on there, but now you know that Scopper is on par with Rayleigh. And then you have City of the Rain, who is definitely weaker than Kuzan. That's not even a debate at this point in time. Even back then, when this information was relevant. It's not anymore, because 3 of the people in this picture are not the number 2s as Oda sees fit, specifically in terms of power. In other ways, I can understand them being the number 2s, but for all of them being in terms of power, it doesn't make much sense, because She the Rain ain't number 2, and Rayleigh has literally someone on par with him, which is Copacabana, and Zoro has Sanji. And then finally, if I were, let's say, break it down into like true blue logistical power scaling fashion based on, let's say, a chart, essentially Zoro leads offensively and then Sanji leads defensively in terms of the attack power, or DC, destructive capacity, what a character can destroy, or let's say range, or let's say even things like hockey, or let's say skills. Zoro leads in those categories. But then things like physical body strength, or let's say durability, or let's say speed and intelligence and other abilities, Sanji leads in those categories, and they wind up evening out ultimately to where they are, again, right there. The Austin, you know, they're like right there, neck and neck, bar for bar. And Oda, I think, is going to maintain frame to the very, very end of the series. I don't think Oda's going to break from that at all, where even come the end of the series, so let's say the final fight for Zoro in the series is Mihawk, and he beats Mihawk, right? Sanji will have his own thing, his own equivalency in some way that will put him on that same level as well. Meaning that come the end of the series, Sanji will also be stronger than Mihawk. But I'm gonna save that for another video, another day. The idea is that when you're gonna be eternal rivals, you gotta maintain frame. If Gabon and Rayleigh have maintained frame of their rivalry, even to this day, if we still Elbaf, then I'm gonna say the same thing for Zoro and Sanji. They are true, genuine rivals, Zoro and Sanji. But that is my video, breaking it down step by step and piece by piece. If you enjoy this video, thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and click on that bell to join the notification squad. I'm gonna catch you guys and gals on the flip side.
See you. Bye bye.